This is the Emergency Medical Minute. The Emergency Medical Minute is excited to announce that we are now offering AMA, PRA, Category 1 credits via online course modules. To access these and for more information, visit our website at www.emergencymedicalminute.com/CME-courses or simply click on the link in our show notes and create an account.
All right. I wanted to talk a little bit about LSD this morning. We've seen a few LSD patients recently. One was particularly memorable on New Year's. I don't know if anyone was here for that one. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about LSD, commonly known as acid. Initially had its heyday, I think, or its peak of use in the 60s, but it's had a couple kind of waves of resurgence, and it does seem to be more common, I think 2016, 2018, and then again more recently. It's actually an incredibly potent compound. A very small amount produces a lot of hallucinogenic effect. LSD is usually taken by mouth on what's called bladder paper. LSD is essentially sprayed on this thin paper that's often decorated with cartoons. And it's fairly cheap. One source I read said about $15 for a standard dose. Early effects of LSD as soon as 30 minutes after ingestion. Is it cheaper than that or more expensive than that?
No, it's just interesting.
I wouldn't consider that cheap. But
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally.
So,
I mean, considering that, like, you can get a pill of Morgo for like $20.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
fair, I guess, when you put it. Yeah.
Early effects as soon as 30 minutes after ingestion, but the peak effects, psychoactive effects, are at about 2 to 4 hours. The half-life's only 3 hours, but if you have really massive ingestions, it can last 18 hours or even more than a day. The drug primarily causes hallucinations or pseudo-hallucinations, which are kind of misperceptions of actual experiences. And a lot of times patients will know that things are not real. So for instance, our patient, while he was having like a violent outbreak, was shouting, "You are not real, you are not real." So there's some recognition that what they're experiencing is a hallucination, but nonetheless inappropriate response. And a lot of times we see people put themselves in harm's way themselves. So for instance, walking into traffic, there have been case reports of patients that have self-amputated their own testicles under hallucinogenic effects of LSD. And so, let's see. What does a patient look like with LSD intoxication? Mydriasis is the dilated pupils, so really large pupils, sweaty, tachycardic, hypertensive, may have nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. It takes a lot of LSD to cause like a dangerous overdose, like we're talking like massive doses. And in those cases, of course, you can get seizures are rare, but can happen. Hyperthermia can be an issue, so sometimes our treatment might need to be aimed at active cooling measures, coma, cardiac arrest, and coagulopathy. So for most people that come to the ER with LSD, it's just a bad trip, and we need to provide a calming, dark, quiet as possible environment where they can just ride it out. Benzodiazepines are helpful often. In more severe cases, may need things like heavy sedation, restraint, active cooling for hyperthermia, and most of the treatment is just supportive. So if they have hyperthermia, you treat that. If they're extremely hypertensive, you treat that. If they have a seizure, you treat that, etc. There's no specific antidote other than mostly benzos.
Can excited delirium be caused by?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's more rare, but again, like the cases we saw in the past couple weeks, people were really out of control, but aware that they were hallucinating, and at least in some respect. So a little bit different than true excited delirium. Lastly, it's not an addictive drug. It doesn't produce compulsive drug-seeking behavior. However, there is a tolerance effect, so folks who use it regularly are going to require escalating doses to get the same effect. And for those who use it chronically, there is a higher risk for schizophreniform psychosis and derangements in problem solving and memory and abstract thinking. I think the take home for us is that no specific antidote. but treat it supportively. And in the cases we've seen recently, we've had to be relatively aggressive with benzos and restraints and things like that. You guys have any questions? Any comments?
So I do,
Yeah.
like years ago, like back east, I used to hear that if you did LSD, it could still end up in like your spinal cord, and you could like trip like years down the road.
So there are these things where when you're completely sober, you can have like flashbacks to your hallucinations. And so you will not have used recently necessarily, but all of a sudden you'll have like a quote unquote flashback, and that is described in the literature. In terms of whether it has entered the central nervous system, I think that's less likely. I think this is more just a long-lasting effect of that, psychosis. So.
Differential of like malignant hyperthermia, would dantrolene help for it at all? If they are hypothermic and tachycardic and like.
I didn't see any cases where dantrolene had been used. So the molecular structure of LSD is similar to serotonin. So particularly in people that are already on like an SSRI for depression or SNRI, it has been known to cause serotonin syndrome. But to be honest, dantrolene is not a common medication and not something I'd reach for quickly. At that point, we'd be talking to toxicology and things like that. All right. Well, thank you guys for your time. Appreciate it.
Hello, EMM listeners. We are dedicated to providing you with high-quality educational content free of charge and without ads. As a nonprofit organization, we rely solely on donations. So if you enjoy our show and are able to make a one-time or recurring donation to help cover our operational costs, any amount is helpful in making this show possible. Click the link in our show notes to make a donation. Thank you.